somewhere in the wooded hills east of Saint-Lô, France, late July 1944, a captured American Jeep sat in a makeshift German motor pool, surrounded by 3 Oberingenieur senior engineers from the Reich Ministry of Armaments. They had travelled from Berlin specifically to examine this vehicle. For 2 hours, they measured, photographed, and documented every component. The chief engineer, a man who had spent 20 years designing automotive systems for Daimler-Benz, finally straightened up from inspecting the transfer case. His notebook contained 6 pages of technical observations. At the bottom of the final page, he had written a single sentence that would appear in his official report 3 weeks later. "We have never achieved this combination of simplicity and capability in any comparable vehicle." This admission represented a complete reversal of German technical assessment. When the first intelligence photographs of American Jeep prototypes reached Berlin in late 1941, the response had been dismissive. The vehicle appeared crude. It had no doors. The body was simple, pressed steel. The windshield folded flat against the hood. To engineers who had spent years refining Ferdinand Porsche's Kübelwagen design, this American creation seemed amateurish, hastily assembled, lacking the sophistication expected from modern military engineering. But by summer 1944, that assessment had transformed entirely. German forces across every theatre were actively seeking to capture American Jeeps intact. Maintenance units had created specialized training programs specifically for servicing captured American vehicles. Supply officers allocated precious fuel reserves to keep captured Jeeps operational despite their higher consumption compared to German equivalents. And now, senior engineers from Berlin were being dispatched to frontline units to study these vehicles in detail, attempting to understand how America had created something German industry apparently could not match. The story of this transformation reveals something deeper than simple vehicle comparison. It exposes the fundamental difference between German and American approaches to military engineering, between optimization for specific conditions and adaptability across unlimited scenarios, between clever engineering and pragmatic mass production. The Jeep was never the most sophisticated light military vehicle. German engineers could identify specific features where the Kübelwagen showed greater technical cleverness, but sophistication proved less valuable than versatility, and versatility depended on qualities German industry could not replicate. Overwhelming production capacity, absolute standardization, and design philosophy that prioritized field maintainability over factory precision. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The origins of German skepticism were rooted in confidence, not ignorance. By 1941, Germany had been at war for 2 years. German forces had conquered Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Low Countries, France, Yugoslavia, and Greece. They had pushed deep into the Soviet Union. This string of victories seemed to validate German military thinking, including vehicle design philosophy. The Kübelwagen had performed admirably in these campaigns, designed by Ferdinand Porsche himself and derived from the Volkswagen that Adolf Hitler had championed as the people's car. The Kübelwagen represented what German engineers considered proper military vehicle design. It weighed approximately 1,600 pounds, significantly lighter than early Jeep prototypes. The air-cooled engine produced initially 23.5 horsepower, later upgraded to 25 horsepower. Despite having only rear-wheel drive, the vehicle's lightweight and flat underbody gave it surprisingly good cross-country performance. The flat floor allowed it to slide over obstacles rather than becoming stuck. The rear-mounted engine provided weight over the drive wheels, improving traction. Self-locking differentials and reduction gearing in the wheel hubs multiplied the limited engine power effectively. German engineers viewed this design as elegant. Why waste resources on complex four-wheel drive systems when clever engineering could achieve similar results with less mechanical complexity? The air-cooled engine eliminated radiators, coolant, and water pumps components that could freeze in Russian winters or be punctured by shrapnel. The simple rear-wheel drive system meant fewer components to maintain. The lightweight meant lower fuel consumption. In German thinking, the Kübelwagen represented efficiency, maximum capability from minimum resources. When photographs of the American Jeep reached German intelligence offices in late 1941, analysts compared them unfavorably to the Kübelwagen. The American vehicle appeared heavier, more complex, and more expensive to produce. One intelligence report from early 1942 described the Jeep as appearing hastily assembled, lacking the engineering refinement visible in German military vehicles. The four-wheel drive system seemed unnecessarily complicated. The liquid-cooled engine appeared vulnerable to damage. The exposed body panels and minimal weather protection suggested rushed design. This assessment reflected genuine German confidence in their own engineering approach. Germany in 1941 had reason for confidence. German industry had produced vehicles that conquered most of Europe. German tactics had revolutionized warfare. German soldiers had proven themselves against multiple opponents. If German engineers had determined that rear-wheel drive light vehicles were optimal, and if the Kübelwagen performed well in actual combat, then surely the American approach with its four-wheel drive complexity represented inferior thinking. But this confidence overlooked critical factors that would prove decisive. German assessments focused on individual vehicle capabilities in isolation. They did not adequately consider industrial production capacity, logistics, standardization, or how quantity itself could become a strategic advantage. A technically superior vehicle produced in limited numbers could not compete with adequate vehicles produced in overwhelming quantities and supported by comprehensive logistics. The American Jeep was not the product of hastily assembled improvisation. It emerged from intense competition and brutal testing. In June 1940, as France fell to German forces, the United States Army issued one of the most demanding vehicle procurement requests in automotive history. The Army wanted a quarter-ton reconnaissance vehicle that could carry 3 men plus equipment, travel cross-country in any terrain, be simple enough for any soldier to drive, rugged enough to withstand combat abuse, and light enough that 4 soldiers could lift it when stuck. The specifications were punishingly specific: wheelbase no more than 80 inches, height not exceeding 40 inches, weight under 1,300 pounds, four-wheel drive mandatory, capable of climbing 60% grades, able to ford 18 inches of water, and perhaps most brutally, the deadline for the first prototype was 49 days, from contract award to delivery of a working vehicle. Most American automotive manufacturers declined to even bid. The requirement seemed impossible. 3 companies accepted the challenge: American Bantam Car Company, a small firm in Butler, Pennsylvania that had been building miniature cars, and surprised the automotive industry by delivering the first working prototype exactly on schedule on September 23, 1940. The Bantam prototype, called the Blitz buggy, performed beautifully in initial Army testing. But the Army had legitimate concerns about Bantam's production capacity. The company had built only 1,200 vehicles total in 1939. Could such a small manufacturer possibly produce tens of thousands of military vehicles? The Army took an unusual step. They invited 2 larger manufacturers, Willys Overland of Toledo, Ohio, and Ford Motor Company, to examine the Bantam design closely and submit their own proposals, incorporating improvements. The result was 3 competing vehicles tested ruthlessly throughout late 1940 and early 1941. Bantam had pioneered the basic layout. Willys contributed the powerful Go Devil engine, producing 60 horsepower, more than double the Kübelwagen's output. Ford refined the body design with the now iconic flat hood and integrated headlights. Each company's prototype excelled in different areas. The Army tested all 3 vehicles to destruction, literally, documenting every failure and demanding improvements. In July 1941, the Army made its decision. Willys would be the primary contractor, but the design would incorporate the best features from all 3 competitors. Ford would also build vehicles to the exact same specifications, ensuring production capacity could meet military requirements. The standardized quarter-ton reconnaissance car, designated the Willys MB and Ford GPW, entered full production in November 1941, just weeks before Pearl Harbor. What emerged from the Toledo and Detroit factories was unlike anything the world had seen. The MB and GPW were absolutely identical in specifications: length 132 inches, width 62 inches, height with windshield up 72 inches, weight 2,160 pounds fully equipped. The Go Devil engine displaced 134 cubic inches and produced 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Top speed approached 60 miles per hour on roads. Ground clearance of 8 3/4 inches allowed traversing terrain that stopped conventional vehicles. The four-wheel drive system with a two-speed transfer case could be engaged or disengaged by simple floor-mounted levers. Low range provided enormous torque for climbing steep grades or pulling through mud. High range allowed efficient highway cruising. The driver could shift from two-wheel to four-wheel drive without stopping, adapting instantly to changing terrain conditions. Most remarkably, the vehicle could be field-maintained with basic tools. The engine had been deliberately designed for durability over precision. Tolerances were looser than civilian automotive standards, which actually made the power plant more reliable under combat conditions. Loose tolerances meant components could tolerate dirt, wear, and rough treatment without failing. Parts were completely interchangeable between Willys and Ford production. A mechanic could grab components from any Jeep to repair any other Jeep, regardless of which factory had assembled either vehicle. This interchangeability represented revolutionary thinking. Most military vehicles required manufacturer-specific parts. A Mercedes truck needed Mercedes parts. An Opel car needed Opel parts. The American approach of absolute standardization across multiple manufacturers created enormous logistical advantages that would prove decisive in sustained global warfare. The name itself reflected the vehicle's nature. While debate continues about the exact origin, most historians agree that Jeep derived from soldiers' pronunciation of GP, military shorthand, meaning either general purpose or government procurement, depending on which explanation one prefers. Soldiers testing early prototypes in 1941 began calling them Jeeps, possibly influenced by a Popeye comic strip character named Eugene the Jeep, who could go anywhere and do anything. The name stuck. When a journalist from the Washington Daily News rode in one of the early production vehicles in February 1941 and asked what it was called, the test driver replied, "It's a Jeep." The article ran nationwide. Willys recognized the marketing potential and trademarked the name in 1943, though soldiers had been using it informally for 2 years by then. General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, would later call the Jeep America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, who followed American troops through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France, wrote that the Jeep was as faithful as a dog, as strong as a mule, and as agile as a goat. It did everything and went everywhere. These were not exaggerations. The Jeep would prove itself in every climate, every terrain, every combat role imaginable. But these accolades came later. In early 1942, as the first Jeeps began shipping to combat zones, German intelligence officers maintained their skepticism. Reports from the Eastern Front occasionally mentioned American vehicles being delivered to Soviet forces through Lend-Lease, but these early reports noted only that Americans were supplying trucks and light vehicles in large numbers. The assessment of quality remained dismissive. The first sustained German exposure to American Jeeps came in North Africa in late 1942. Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa beginning in November, brought American forces into direct contact with Axis troops for the first time in the war. Thousands of Jeeps landed with the invasion force. German and Italian soldiers defending Tunisia got their first close look at the vehicles Americans had been mass-producing for a year. The initial German assessment remained mixed. Captured intelligence reports from early 1943 acknowledged the Jeep's speed and cross-country mobility, but criticized what observers viewed as poor fuel economy, minimal armor protection, and vulnerability to mines and small arms fire. One German report noted that American forces seemed to have unlimited numbers of these vehicles, suggesting wasteful overproduction rather than tactical necessity. At German headquarters in Tunisia in January 1943, officers examining their first captured Jeep found much to criticize. The exposed engine compartment could be damaged by mud and debris. The canvas top provided no protection whatsoever from shrapnel or small arms fire. The fuel tank mounted directly beneath the driver's seat seemed like catastrophic design stupidity. One bullet could ignite the entire vehicle. The simple 3-speed transmission lacked the sophistication of German vehicles, but there were troubling observations as well. The Jeep's power-to-weight ratio was remarkable. With 60 horsepower moving only 2,100 pounds, it could accelerate faster than almost any German light vehicle. The four-wheel drive system, engaged by simple floor levers that any soldier could operate, worked flawlessly even in deep sand. The ground clearance allowed traversing obstacles that stopped Kübelwagens cold. Most disturbing was the realization that Americans were producing these vehicles at incomprehensible rates. Captured documents revealed production figures that German intelligence initially dismissed as propaganda or translation errors. According to these documents, Willys and Ford together were building Jeeps at a rate exceeding one vehicle every 90 seconds during peak production shifts. One every 90 seconds. German intelligence officers recalculated multiple times, certain there must be errors in the documents. There were no errors. By early 1943, American factories had already produced over 170,000 Jeeps. German production of all light military vehicles combined Kübelwagens, motorcycles, staff cars barely exceeded 50,000 total. The implications staggered comprehension. If American industrial capacity could produce reconnaissance vehicles in such quantities, what did that suggest about tanks, artillery, aircraft? If America could build sophisticated four-wheel drive vehicles faster than Germany could build simple rear-wheel drive equivalents, what did that reveal about relative industrial power? The first reports of German soldiers actively seeking to capture American Jeeps intact came from Tunisia in March 1943. After the Battle of Kasserine Pass, where German forces had initially pushed American troops back in February, retreating Wehrmacht units took with them every operational Jeep they could find. Officers wrote in after-action reports that the captured American vehicles proved invaluable for reconnaissance and command functions. The reasons became clear as the North African campaign progressed through spring 1943. The terrain of Tunisia combined rocky mountain passes, deep sand wadis, coastal salt flats, and roads in varying states of disrepair. German vehicles struggled. The Kübelwagen, despite its clever design, lacked the power to climb steep grades while carrying full loads of men and equipment. Its rear-wheel drive system, adequate in testing, proved inadequate in combat conditions where speed often determined survival. Heavier German vehicles, staff cars, light trucks consumed precious fuel at rates that strained already overstretched Axis supply lines. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps had been fighting supply shortages since 1941. Every gallon of fuel, every spare part, every replacement vehicle had to be shipped across the Mediterranean under constant Allied air and naval attack. The logistics situation was deteriorating steadily. The American Jeep, by contrast, seemed purpose-built for exactly these conditions. Its powerful 60-horsepower engine pulled it up grades that stopped Kübelwagens. The four-wheel drive system maintained traction in sand and mud, where rear-wheel drive vehicles spun, helplessly, wasting fuel and time. Most critically, captured Jeeps came with something German vehicles utterly lacked: abundant spare parts. American logistics were so comprehensive that maintenance depots held massive stocks of replacement components. Every American unit had dedicated supply personnel whose sole job was ensuring vehicle availability. When German mechanics examined captured American supply dumps, they found warehouses literally filled with Jeep parts, engines, transmissions, axles, wheels, body panels, all standardized, all interchangeable. German mechanics realized they could keep captured Jeeps running indefinitely simply by raiding American supply stocks. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Müller, commanding a reconnaissance battalion in Tunisia, wrote in his journal in April 1943 that his men had captured 6 American jeeps during a raid on an American supply convoy. Within 2 weeks, he had formally requested that his entire unit's German vehicles be replaced with captured American equipment. The jeeps were faster, more reliable, and critically, easier to maintain than anything in his original motor pool. When his request was denied due to concerns about fuel availability, jeeps consumed more fuel than Kübelwagens. Müller noted bitterly that his Kübelwagens were consuming nearly as much fuel while covering half the distance. The power difference meant German vehicles had to work at maximum output constantly, reducing efficiency. The jeeps, with power to spare, operated more efficiently at the same speeds. May 1943 brought the collapse of Axis forces in North Africa. When General Jürgen von Arnim surrendered on May 13, approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers entered Allied captivity. Among the equipment abandoned or destroyed were several hundred captured American jeeps that German units had been operating, some for months. Allied intelligence officers cataloguing abandoned Axis equipment were genuinely surprised to find so many of their own vehicles among German motor pools. Systematic interrogations of captured German officers revealed a consistent pattern. Given choice between a German Kübelwagen and a captured American jeep, officers overwhelmingly preferred the jeep for reconnaissance and command duties. Some units had been operating captured American vehicles for months, incorporating them fully into German tables of organization. Maintenance records recovered from German units showed these captured vehicles often logged more operational hours than German equipment. The jeeps simply worked, reliably, day after day. German vehicles required constant attention, frequent repairs, and careful operation to avoid breakdowns. The reliability difference meant German commanders increasingly assigned their most critical missions to units equipped with captured American vehicles. The intelligence reports from North Africa reached German High Command in Berlin by June 1943. The conclusions were profoundly uncomfortable. American industrial capacity was producing vehicles in quantities Germany could never hope to match. The American Jeep, initially dismissed as primitive and inferior, was demonstrably superior for reconnaissance and light transport roles in actual combat conditions. German units were actively seeking to capture and use enemy equipment, strongly suggesting significant deficiencies in Wehrmacht vehicles. Some German officers recommended immediately accelerating production of four-wheel drive variants of the Kübelwagen. Others suggested copying the American design. Outright industrial espionage was standard practice for all nations. Still others argued, more realistically, that Germany simply could not compete with American production capacity and should focus resources on areas where German engineering held clear advantages: heavy tanks, artillery, advanced aircraft. The debate became academic. By mid-1943, German industry was struggling to maintain production levels of any vehicles while facing increasing Allied bombing campaigns. Introducing an entirely new four-wheel drive light vehicle design was impossible. The industrial capacity, machine tools, and raw materials simply did not exist. Germany would have to fight with what it already had in production. Meanwhile, Jeep production in America continued accelerating. By the end of 1943, total production exceeded 360,000 vehicles. The production process had been refined to extraordinary efficiency. Willys plant workers in Toledo could completely assemble a Jeep from raw components in less than 3 hours. Parts were manufactured in factories across 32 states, then shipped to Toledo or Ford plants in Dallas and Louisville for final assembly. The standardization was so absolute that parts from any factory would fit any vehicle perfectly. A carburetor built in Wisconsin would work identically in a Jeep assembled in Kentucky. A transmission from Illinois was interchangeable with one from Michigan. This interchangeability, combined with massive production volumes, created logistical advantages unprecedented in military history. Every Jeep in every combat zone could be maintained with parts from any supply depot anywhere in the world. Compare this to German logistics, where different vehicles required specific parts from specific manufacturers. A Kübelwagen needed Volkswagen parts. An Opel Blitz truck needed Opel parts. A Mercedes staff car needed Mercedes components. Supply officers faced nightmares, trying to keep mechanically diverse motor pools operational with parts that rarely interchanged. The transformation in German attitudes toward the Jeep accelerated dramatically, with the Allied invasion of Italy beginning in September 1943. American and British forces landing at Salerno brought thousands of Jeeps ashore in the initial assault waves. German forces defending Italy got their most sustained exposure yet to American mechanization operating in difficult terrain. In the mountains of southern Italy, where roads were primitive and terrain brutally challenging, the Jeep's advantages became overwhelming and undeniable. German forces attempting to establish defensive positions found themselves consistently outpaced by American reconnaissance units in Jeeps that could navigate mountain trails utterly impossible for heavier vehicles. German counterattacks that relied on surprise found American units almost impossible to surprise because Jeep-mounted patrols provided constant intelligence on German movements, positions, and preparations. Every American infantry regiment had approximately 145 Jeeps assigned to its table of organization. This meant American commanders possessed mobility and flexibility that German officers could only imagine. A typical German regimental commander might have a handful of staff cars and motorcycles for his entire headquarters. His American counterpart commanded a fleet of Jeeps that could rapidly reposition troops, evacuate wounded, move supplies, and provide mobile communications across the entire regiment. The casualty evacuation capability particularly impressed German medical officers who treated wounded American prisoners. American Jeeps could be converted to ambulances in minutes by mounting stretchers across the rear seats and hood. This meant wounded soldiers could reach field hospitals within minutes of being injured, dramatically improving survival rates compared to German wounded, who often faced hour-long journeys over rough roads in conventional ambulances. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The difference in survival rates was measurable and shocking. Captured German medical personnel reported their genuine surprise at how quickly American wounded received treatment, transported rapidly from front lines to surgical hospitals in vehicles that could traverse any terrain at high speed. German wounded often died from shock or blood loss during long, rough ambulance trips. American wounded reached surgeons while still viable for treatment. In December 1943, Generalleutnant Friedrich Schulz, captured near Cassino, was interviewed by American intelligence officers. When asked specifically about American equipment that impressed German forces, he stated flatly that German generals admired the Jeep more than any other piece of American materiel. It was, he said, the vehicle German officers most desired to capture for general use in Wehrmacht service. This assessment from a senior German officer with extensive combat experience marked a complete reversal from the dismissive intelligence reports of early 1942. Within 2 years, German military opinion had transformed from viewing the Jeep as primitive and inferior to recognizing it as perhaps the most valuable piece of American equipment after aircraft and artillery. By early 1944, captured Jeeps had become so highly prized among German forces in Italy that special orders were issued regarding their use and maintenance. Captured American vehicles were to be clearly marked with German military insignia and recognition symbols to prevent friendly fire incidents. German soldiers had begun shooting at Jeeps automatically, not realizing some were Wehrmacht-operated. Maintenance crews received specific training on Jeep mechanics, studying captured American technical manuals that had been translated into German. Fuel allocation for captured vehicles received priority, despite their higher consumption compared to Kübelwagens. The reasoning was brutally practical. A Jeep could accomplish reconnaissance missions that might require 2 or 3 German vehicles. Its speed, range, and cross-country capability made it more operationally valuable than German equipment despite consuming more fuel. The calculation was simple. One Jeep burning extra fuel completed more missions than multiple Kübelwagens burning less fuel combined. German units operating captured Jeeps consistently reported significantly improved tactical mobility in after-action reports. They could conduct reconnaissance deeper into Allied lines, moving faster and covering more ground than possible with Kübelwagens. The four-wheel drive system meant they could operate in weather and terrain conditions that completely immobilized German rear-wheel drive vehicles. Winter mud that stopped Kübelwagens barely slowed jeeps. The intelligence value was enormous. A German reconnaissance team in a captured jeep could pass for American forces at distance, allowing them to move closer to Allied positions before being identified. The mechanical reliability meant fewer breakdowns during critical missions. Missions that failed due to vehicle breakdowns yielded no intelligence and often cost German lives. The simple, rugged design meant even minimally trained mechanics could perform field repairs with basic tools. Operation Greif, during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, provided perhaps the most dramatic example of German desperation to acquire American jeeps. When Adolf Hitler personally ordered SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny to conduct special operations behind American lines, Skorzeny specifically requested large numbers of captured American vehicles, with particular emphasis on jeeps. The plan required German commandos dressed in American uniforms to penetrate Allied lines, cut communications, change road signs, and create maximum confusion during the opening hours of Germany's last major offensive in the West. Skorzeny calculated he needed at least 100 captured jeeps to execute the operation effectively. Each commando team would require a vehicle to maintain mobility and avoid suspicion. German supply officers scoured rear areas across the entire Western Front, contacting every unit that might possess captured American vehicles. They offered priority fuel allocations, replacement vehicles, even cash bonuses to units that would surrender captured jeeps for the operation. Despite these incentives and Hitler's personal backing giving the operation unlimited authority, German forces managed to acquire only approximately 30 jeeps, 30 vehicles, from an entire army group, across hundreds of kilometers of front lines. After 2.5 years of fighting American forces, the shortage forced Skorzeny to improvise desperately. German mechanics disguised Volkswagen, Kübelwagens and other vehicles with sheet metal modifications, painting them olive drab and adding white stars. The disguises were crude and would not survive close inspection, but Skorzeny had no alternatives. The fact that even with Hitler's direct orders and unlimited requisition authority, German forces could only locate 30 captured American jeeps across the entire Western Front revealed how difficult these vehicles were to capture intact. American forces simply had too many jeeps. Units that lost vehicles to enemy action immediately requisitioned replacements from supply depots, stocked with thousands of spare vehicles. Americans rarely abandoned operational jeeps during retreats. The vehicles were too valuable and too mobile to leave behind. When jeeps were damaged beyond immediate repair, American units typically destroyed them deliberately rather than risk capture. The German commandos who did receive captured jeeps for Operation Greif found them remarkably effective for infiltration during the opening days of the Battle of the Bulge. Dressed in American uniforms and driving genuine American jeeps, small teams of German soldiers managed to penetrate deep behind Allied lines. They changed road signs, cut telephone wires, spread false information, and caused confusion among American units trying to respond to the surprise offensive. American checkpoint guards became increasingly paranoid, questioning everyone and demanding proof of identity. Soldiers were asked to identify baseball players, name state capitals, recite advertising slogans, cultural knowledge no German could possess. The captured commandos, when eventually identified and interrogated, consistently praised the jeep's performance during their missions. They noted its speed allowed quick escapes when suspicion arose. Its maneuverability helped evade checkpoints. Most importantly, its sheer ubiquity in American forces meant one more jeep attracted absolutely no special attention. The operation ultimately failed strategically. The Battle of the Bulge ended in decisive German defeat, but it demonstrated conclusively how effectively German soldiers could operate American equipment when given opportunity. The jeeps themselves performed flawlessly in German hands, suggesting that any perceived deficiencies were matters of fuel availability and logistics rather than fundamental engineering shortcomings. The invasion of France in June 1944 brought jeep numbers to levels that utterly astonished German defenders. Operation Overlord involved landing approximately 20,000 jeeps in Normandy during the first weeks of the invasion. 20,000 vehicles. That was nearly half of total German light vehicle production for the entire war, delivered to a single theatre in a single month. German forces defending Normandy found themselves facing an American army with mobility advantages beyond anything they had previously encountered. While German infantry divisions relied primarily on horse-drawn transport, yes, horses in 1944 with only a fraction of their logistics motorized, American divisions were fully mechanized. Every soldier, every weapon, every supply crate could move by motor vehicle. The Jeep was absolutely central to this mobility advantage. It served simultaneously as scout car, command vehicle, communications platform, weapons carrier, ambulance, and general transport. German officers captured in Normandy consistently mentioned American Jeeps when interrogated about equipment advantages. The vehicles seemed to be everywhere, performing every conceivable military function. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer reconnaissance battalion, wrote in his post-war memoirs that he had personally used a captured American Jeep for several weeks after his own command vehicle was destroyed by Allied fighter bombers. He found it superior to German reconnaissance vehicles in almost every measurable respect except fuel economy. The power, reliability, and cross-country capability exceeded anything Germany produced in the light vehicle category. But the German fuel shortage in France during summer 1944 increasingly made captured Jeeps impractical to operate on a large scale. Even when German units successfully captured Jeeps intact, which was difficult as Americans learned to destroy abandoned vehicles, operating them became nearly impossible as fuel supplies dwindled to critical levels. Allied air supremacy meant German fuel convoys were systematically destroyed. Synthetic fuel production in Germany was being devastated by strategic bombing. The Wehrmacht was slowly being starved of mobility. Some German commanders issued orders that captured Jeeps be used only for the most absolutely critical missions to conserve scarce fuel. Others simply abandoned captured vehicles when fuel ran out, sometimes after driving them only a few kilometers. This created a tragic irony where German forces desperately wanted American Jeeps, but often could not use them effectively even when captured due to logistics collapse. The few German units that maintained adequate fuel supplies, primarily SS Panzer divisions that received priority allocations, continued operating captured Jeeps throughout summer 1944. These elite units consistently reported that the vehicles remained superior for reconnaissance missions despite higher fuel consumption. The strategic mobility and tactical flexibility they provided justified the extra fuel expenditure when fuel was actually available. One captured SS officer told American interrogators that his unit would gladly trade 2 Kübelwagens for 1 American Jeep if fuel supplies permitted operating it. The Jeep's advantages were so overwhelming that even fuel-starved German forces wanted them desperately, willing to accept significantly higher consumption rates in exchange for dramatically superior capability. The technical comparison between the Jeep and Kübelwagen reveals precisely why German soldiers so strongly preferred the American vehicle when given direct experience with both. The numbers tell an unambiguous story. The Kübelwagen weighed approximately 1,600 pounds, about 500 pounds lighter than the Jeep's 2,100 pounds. It was powered by an air-cooled engine producing 23.5 horsepower initially, upgraded to 25 horsepower in 1943, still less than half the Jeep's 60 horsepower output. This gave the Kübelwagen a power-to-weight ratio of approximately 15 horsepower per ton. The Jeep achieved approximately 28 horsepower per ton. The performance difference was dramatic and immediately apparent to anyone who drove both vehicles. The Jeep could accelerate significantly faster from standstill. It could climb much steeper grades while carrying full loads. It could maintain higher speeds across rough terrain. The Kübelwagen's top speed was about 50 miles per hour on good roads, but it struggled to maintain even 30 miles per hour off-road under combat loads. The Jeep's top speed approached 60 miles per hour on roads, and it could sustain 40 miles per hour across moderately rough terrain. 4. Reconnaissance units where speed often determined survival. This performance gap was potentially the difference between completing a mission successfully and being caught by enemy forces. The four-wheel drive difference proved even more critical in actual combat conditions. The Kübelwagen relied on rear-wheel drive with a self-locking differential and portal gear reduction hubs, clever engineering that provided surprisingly good off-road performance under many conditions. The flat underbody design meant the vehicle could slide over some obstacles rather than becoming stuck on them. The lightweight meant it did not sink deeply into soft ground. In sand, snow, and certain mud conditions, the Kübelwagen's lightweight and flat floor sometimes gave it advantages over heavier vehicles. German engineers pointed to these specific scenarios as validation of their design philosophy, but in steep terrain, when crossing obstacles, or in any situation requiring maximum traction, the Jeep's four-wheel drive proved overwhelmingly superior. Power delivered to all four wheels simultaneously meant the Jeep could climb grades and traverse obstacles physically impossible for the Kübelwagen. American testing demonstrated that Jeeps could climb 60% grades when fully loaded, that is, 60 feet of elevation gain per 100 feet of horizontal distance. The Kübelwagen could barely manage 30% grades with similar loads. In mountainous terrain like Italy or southern France, this difference was absolutely decisive. German reconnaissance units in Kübelwagens simply could not access routes that American units in Jeeps used routinely. Reliability emerged as another critical factor that German soldiers noticed immediately when operating both vehicles. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was theoretically simple and reliable, requiring no radiator, coolant, or water pump that could freeze or be damaged. But its severely limited power output meant it constantly operated at maximum output under combat conditions. Engines working at maximum capacity continuously suffer premature wear and increased failure rates. The Jeep's more powerful engine rarely operated anywhere near maximum output during normal operations. Even when climbing steep grades or carrying heavy loads, the 60-horsepower engine had power reserves available. This meant significantly reduced mechanical stress, which directly translated to extended service life and improved reliability. German mechanics operating captured Jeeps consistently reported fewer breakdowns and longer intervals between required maintenance compared to Kübelwagens. Maintenance requirements decisively favored the Jeep in sustained combat operations. While the Kübelwagen was designed for mechanical simplicity, the Jeep's absolute standardization meant replacement parts were universally available throughout American logistics chains. German mechanics working on Kübelwagens often faced extended delays, waiting for replacement parts that had to be manufactured in Germany, shipped across contested supply lines, and distributed through increasingly disrupted logistics networks. American mechanics working on Jeeps simply requisitioned parts from the nearest supply depot, where stocks were literally measured in thousands of individual components. Every American supply dump, from frontline battalion aid stations to massive port facilities, maintained Jeep parts inventories. The parts were absolutely interchangeable. A water pump from any Jeep fit any other Jeep perfectly. This eliminated the matching and fitting often required with German parts. The most revealing comparison comes from German units that operated both vehicles simultaneously under identical conditions. Given completely free choice with adequate fuel supplies available, German soldiers at every rank from private to general almost universally preferred captured American Jeeps over their own Kübelwagens for actual combat operations. This preference appears consistently in captured documents, interrogation reports, and post-war memoirs from German officers who commanded units with access to both vehicle types. The production statistics reveal the true magnitude of American industrial advantage over Germany in this category. From 1941 through 1945, Willys produced 361,339 MB Jeeps. Ford built 277,896 GPW Jeeps. Combined production exceeded 639,000 vehicles built to absolutely identical specifications. Germany, by comparison, produced exactly 50,435 Kübelwagens during the entire war. The arithmetic is devastating. America built more than 12 times as many quarter-ton vehicles as Germany across the same time period. 12 to 1. And this ratio becomes even more favorable to America when considering that roughly 30% of American Jeep production went to Allied forces through Lend-Lease programs. Britain received thousands of Jeeps that equipped British reconnaissance units and airborne forces. The Soviet Union received tens of thousands of Jeeps that proved invaluable in the vast spaces of the Eastern Front. Free French forces were equipped almost entirely with American vehicles, including thousands of Jeeps. Chinese forces fighting Japan received Jeeps through American aid programs. Even smaller Allied nations received Jeep allocations. This meant German forces faced Jeeps not only when fighting Americans directly, but also when engaging British, Soviet, French, and even Chinese units in various theaters. The universality of the Jeep across all Allied forces created additional multiplicative advantages beyond simple numbers. When American, British, and Free French units operated together in combined operations, they could share spare parts and maintenance support for their Jeeps seamlessly. A British unit could requisition parts from an American supply depot. An American mechanic could repair a Free French Jeep using standard procedures. German forces, by stark contrast, operated a bewildering variety of light vehicles from different manufacturers with completely non-interchangeable parts and varying maintenance requirements. Supply officers faced logistical nightmares trying to stock appropriate parts for diverse fleets. Mechanics needed training on multiple vehicle types. Standardization, the quality that made American logistics so efficient, was almost entirely absent from German military vehicle procurement. The Jeep's versatility in service exceeded anything German planners had envisioned possible for light vehicles. It served not merely as reconnaissance car and command vehicle, but in literally dozens of specialized roles that commanders invented based on immediate tactical requirements. Jeeps mounting pedestal-mounted Browning 50 caliber machine guns served as fast-moving weapons platforms. British SAS forces in North Africa famously used Jeeps mounting multiple machine guns for devastating raids on German airfields, approaching at high speed with all guns firing simultaneously. Jeeps modified with wire-cutting devices mounted on the front bumper protected crews from throat-height wires that Germans strung across roads specifically to decapitate motorcycle and Jeep drivers, a particularly nasty defensive measure. Jeeps, equipped with radio sets, became mobile communications centers that could reposition rapidly as tactical situations changed. Jeeps mounting stretchers across the hood and rear seats served as fast ambulances capable of traversing terrain impossible for conventional ambulances. Jeeps towing small trailers moved supplies forward and evacuated wounded back simultaneously, maximizing efficiency. Jeeps fitted with special flanged wheels could operate on railway tracks when roads were destroyed, an improvisation American engineers developed in France. Combat-engineered Jeeps carried generators, welding equipment, and tools for field repairs. Artillery forward observers used Jeeps to move rapidly between firing positions, calling fire missions from multiple locations. Reconnaissance units in Jeeps could cover enormous distances daily, providing intelligence impossible to gather with slower vehicles or foot patrols. Airborne divisions loaded Jeeps into Waco CG-4A gliders, providing paratroopers with immediate tactical mobility after landing. British airborne forces did the same at Arnhem. Some Jeeps were experimentally made amphibious with inflatable flotation devices, though this variant proved less successful than the standard model. The critical factor was adaptability of the basic design. Units could modify Jeeps for highly specific missions using only local resources and minimal specialized tools. A standard Jeep could become a weapons platform within hours by welding simple mounting brackets for machine guns. It could become an ambulance in minutes by installing stretcher racks. This extraordinary flexibility made the Jeep invaluable in fluid combat situations, where requirements changed rapidly and unpredictably. German light vehicles, while certainly capable in their originally designed roles, fundamentally lacked this adaptability. The Kübelwagen was an excellent reconnaissance car, as designed, but proved extremely difficult to modify for other specialized uses. Its severely limited power margin meant adding any significant weight or equipment dramatically degraded performance. The Jeep's substantial power reserves meant it could carry additional equipment, armor plating, or weapons while still maintaining entirely adequate performance for most missions. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, later identified the Jeep as one of only 5 pieces of equipment most vital to Allied success in North Africa and Europe. The other 4 items were the C-47 Dakota transport aircraft, the 2.5-ton cargo truck, the Caterpillar bulldozer, and the DUKW amphibious vehicle. Eisenhower specifically noted that, curiously, none of these 5 critical items were direct combat weapons. They were tools enabling mobility, logistics, and construction, the unglamorous foundations that made combat operations possible. The Jeep's inclusion in this exclusive list, personally selected from all American military equipment by the Supreme Commander himself, testified powerfully to its strategic importance. Eisenhower understood that wars were won not primarily by superior tanks or aircraft, but by superior logistics and mobility. The Jeep embodied both qualities perfectly. The production tempo at peak output staggers imagination even today. During 1944, combined output exceeded 15,000 Jeeps monthly, averaging 500 vehicles per single day. The logistics required to achieve this demanded coordination across hundreds of component suppliers scattered across the United States. Engines manufactured in Wisconsin, transmissions from Michigan, axles from Illinois, body panels from Ohio, all converging on final assembly lines in Toledo and Dallas, with precision timing that allowed continuous production. The efficiency improved constantly throughout the war years, through systematic process refinement. Early production in 1941 required significantly more man-hours per vehicle than late production in 1944. Learning curves, process improvements, and selective automation steadily reduced the labor required to build each Jeep. By 1944, the man-hours required to assemble one complete Jeep had dropped by nearly 40% compared to 1941 production, even as total production volume increased dramatically. Cost reductions paralleled efficiency gains in remarkable fashion. The initial Army contract in July 1941 specified a unit cost of $738.74 per vehicle. By 1944, improved production processes and economies of scale had reduced the effective cost to approximately $600 per Jeep. This meant America was simultaneously building more Jeeps, faster and cheaper. As the war progressed, the exact opposite of Germany's experience, where production volumes declined, costs increased steadily, and efficiency degraded progressively under relentless Allied strategic bombing. The final year of the war, 1945, saw German forces in complete logistical and organizational collapse. Fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, and total disintegration of German logistics meant that even when German units managed to capture American equipment intact, they often could not operate it for lack of fuel or spare parts. Abandoned American vehicles, including Jeeps, littered roads throughout Germany as German forces retreated or simply dissolved. Yet even in these desperate final months, individual German soldiers continued actively seeking captured American Jeeps whenever remotely possible. Personal mobility retained value even as strategic mobility completely collapsed. German officers used captured Jeeps to move between rapidly disintegrating units, attempting to maintain some semblance of command and control. German soldiers used captured Jeeps to flee advancing Allied armies, abandoning their posts but taking American vehicles when available. The Jeep had completed an extraordinary transformation in German military perception. From being dismissed as primitive and inferior in 1942, it had become the single most desired piece of equipment in the German military by 1945. This progression was documented, measurable, and ultimately admitted by German officers themselves. Post-war interrogations of captured German officers provided the final, definitive assessment. When asked systematically to evaluate American equipment and identify the most impressive or strategically valuable items, German commanders at every level consistently rated the Jeep among the top American achievements. Some senior officers rated it more strategically valuable than American tanks or even aircraft. The reasoning, when explained, was remarkably consistent across multiple independent sources. Tanks and aircraft were certainly dramatic and drew considerable attention and respect, but the Jeep enabled everything else in American operations. It provided the fundamental mobility, tactical flexibility, and logistics capability that made American combined arms operations possible at scale. Superior firepower meant absolutely nothing without the logistics infrastructure to supply it continuously. Advanced tactics required mobility to implement effectively. The Jeep, perhaps more than any other single piece of equipment, embodied the American industrial and organizational advantages that Germany simply could not match or counter. The production numbers, the absolute standardization, the mechanical reliability, and the operational versatility of the Jeep collectively represented everything about American military methods that Germany proved unable to replicate. General der Panzertruppen Friedrich von Mellenthin, who had commanded armoured divisions in North Africa, the Eastern Front, and Western Europe, told American interrogators after the war that the American Jeep ranked among the 3 most militarily valuable pieces of equipment the Allies possessed. The other 2 items he identified were long-range fighter aircraft that protected bomber formations deep into Germany, and proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells that devastated German aircraft formations. The Jeep earned placement on this extremely short list, not because it was more powerful or more directly lethal than other weapons systems, but because it fundamentally multiplied the effectiveness of everything else in the American arsenal. It made artillery more responsive, infantry more mobile, logistics more efficient, reconnaissance more thorough, and command more flexible. These force multiplier effects proved strategically decisive. Back in those wooded hills east of Saint-Lô in July 1944, the 3 German engineers completed their examination of the captured American Jeep. Their report, filed 3 weeks later after they returned to Berlin, ran to 47 pages of technical analysis. The document examined engine design, transmission specifications, 4-wheel drive system architecture, suspension geometry, and manufacturing techniques visible in the construction. The report's conclusion was remarkable for its directness. German engineering, the authors acknowledged, had pursued sophistication and efficiency maximum capability from minimum resources. This approach produced the Kübelwagen, a clever vehicle that performed adequately under many conditions. American engineering had pursued a fundamentally different goal: sufficient capability with absolute reliability, produced in overwhelming quantity with comprehensive logistical support. The report noted that individual German vehicles sometimes showed superior engineering cleverness in specific subsystems. But American methods, standardization, mass production, interchangeable parts, and abundant supply created military advantages that German cleverness could not overcome. One engineer wrote that Germany had been attempting to win through quality what America won through quantity, and that this approach had proven catastrophically inadequate when facing an opponent with both adequate quality and overwhelming quantity simultaneously. The transformation of German attitudes toward the American Jeep traced one of World War II's most complete psychological reversals. In 1941 and 1942, intelligence officers dismissed it as primitive, inferior to German engineering, barely worthy of serious analysis. By 1943, combat units were actively seeking to capture Jeeps intact, recognizing their value through direct experience. By 1944, the Wehrmacht was training specialized maintenance crews specifically to service captured Jeeps and allocating scarce fuel to keep them operational. By 1945, even as Germany collapsed, soldiers still praised American Jeeps above nearly all other Allied equipment. This progression revealed the broader story of how the war was actually won. Germany entered the conflict with justified confidence in its technical and tactical superiority. German vehicles, German tactics, and German soldiers had proven themselves superior in the opening campaigns. Early victories from Poland through France seemed to confirm these assumptions completely, but American industrial capacity, organizational ability, and engineering pragmatism gradually and then suddenly overwhelmed German advantages across every category. The Jeep epitomized this process perfectly. It was never the most technically sophisticated light military vehicle designed, German engineers could legitimately point to specific features of the Kübelwagen that demonstrated greater engineering cleverness or efficiency. But sophistication and cleverness ultimately mattered far less than production capacity, absolute reliability, universal standardization, and comprehensive logistics support. America built enough Jeeps to equip every unit that needed them, maintained those vehicles with universally available spare parts, and employed them with remarkable flexibility across every conceivable combat role. German soldiers recognized this overwhelming reality faster and more clearly than German high command. Frontline troops saw directly that American units possessed mobility that German forces could not match. They saw American wounded reaching surgical hospitals within minutes, while German wounded died during hour-long ambulance journeys. They saw American supplies moving forward continuously, while German logistics collapsed. They saw American commanders responding to changing tactical situations with speed that German commanders could not achieve. Much of this American advantage stemmed fundamentally from having enough Jeeps that tactical mobility became routine rather than exceptional, something to be assumed in planning rather than carefully rationed in execution. When German commanders managed to capture intact American supply depots, they found massive warehouses literally filled with Jeep spare parts in quantities that seemed incomprehensible. When they examined captured American organizational charts and tables of equipment, they discovered that even the smallest American units had Jeep allocations that exceeded entire German battalions. When they observed American operations directly, they saw Jeeps performing every conceivable military function, from transporting generals to towing artillery to evacuating wounded to running communications. The sheer ubiquity of the Jeep throughout American military forces had absolutely no German equivalent. Kübelwagens were valuable but remained scarce, carefully husbanded, assigned only to highest priority units. American Jeeps were so numerous they seemed almost disposable. Units that lost Jeeps to enemy action or mechanical failure simply requisitioned immediate replacements from supply depots stocked with thousands of spare vehicles. This abundance created strategic flexibility that German forces never possessed. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.